If you're anything like me, you're getting really, really tired of hate groups promoting hate while pretending to love God and the Bible. And in today's discussion, Focus on the Family is just that, a hate group that pretends to be an evangelical Christian organization, allegedly responsible for multiple deaths within the LGBTQIA+ community. In late 2022, just days after a gunman massacred 5 people at an LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs, vandals spray painted a chilling message on the brick sign outside Focus on the Family's headquarters. Quote, "Their blood is on your hands. 5 lives taken." The accusatory graffiti linking the evangelical ministry's outspoken anti-LGBTQ stance to real-world violence was quickly covered with a tarp, but not before photos went viral. So how did we get here? How did we get to a place in society where so-called Christians are rallying against a group of people and then not taking the blame when somebody victimizes that group of people? Because you know what they say, there's no hate like Christian love. So today we are going to try to figure out what exactly is going on with Focus on the Family. Has it ever been well-intentioned, or is it just a hate group in disguise? We'll try to determine that today. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello everyone, welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post a video on one of these topics about 3 times a week, so if you are interested in this sort of thing, please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here. Also, throughout the holiday season, I am featuring a different single parent in each of my videos. These are people who have emailed me their Amazon wish lists with a little bit about themselves, and if you have the means this holiday season, please considering helping purchase an item on the list. The list will be found in that pinned comment down below. And I still need some more single parents, so if you are one, please email me your Amazon wish list to letfresherin@gmail.com. Today's mom's name is Casey. Hi, Erin. I've watched you since almost the beginning of your channel and love that you're so generous with your platform. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. OG. I have a TikTok friend, Savannah. Oh, this is for a friend? That's so cool. I have a TikTok friend, Savannah, who is a recently single mom of 3, all under 6 years old. Boy, your hands are full. She's been through a lot in the past year, and I want to do what I can to help her. She's been posting her journey on TikTok, and she's doing her best, and I think having some extra help for gifts for her kids this holiday season would be extra helpful. Aw, that's so cool. So please go check out Surviving with Savannah on TikTok and her Amazon wishlist down below, and thank you all so much for helping to spread holiday cheer this season. And without further ado, let's jump into the early history of Focus on the Family. Now, Focus on the Family was born in 1977 in a modest office in Southern California. It was the brainchild of Dr. James C. Dobson. Dobson was an evangelical Christian and licensed psychologist, which is kind of a scary combination if you ask me, because how does one thing not affect the other? But anyways, he gained national attention with his 1970 parenting book, Dare to Discipline, which sounds scary, and advocated traditional Bible-based child rearing, including corporal punishment. Yep, this guy's pro-corporal punishment. And he kind of framed it as this antidote to the permissive parenting trend of the 60s. Now, at the time, Dobson was working as a professor of pediatrics at USC's medical school and on staff at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. We gotta get this guy away from children, if you ask me. Anyways, he says that he felt a calling to reach a wider audience with practical family advice rooted in conservative Christian values. So in 1977, he took a leap of faith. Dobson requested a leave of absence from the hospital and started a new nonprofit ministry called Focus on the Family. Of course, it's a nonprofit. Gotta get that non-taxable revenue, don't ya? Now, the initial platform for Focus on the Family was a 15-minute daily radio program featuring Dobson's folksy yet forceful counsel on marriage and parenting. Think like Manosphere podcasting before Manosphere podcasting for essentially corporal punishment of children. He would broadcast from Arcadia, California, and tackle topics like disciplining children, maintaining a strong marriage, and navigating teen troubles, all with a clear message that following biblical principles was the key to a healthy family. And the show struck a chord. By the early 1980s, Focus on the Family's audience and donor base were growing rapidly. I mean, this is the early 1980s, the late 70s. There is this resurgence of Christianity sweeping the nation after the quote-unquote chaos of the free-loving 60s and 70s. So he kind of struck while the iron was hot. And this was only further bolstered and supported by Dobson's reputation as a compassionate family doctor for these troubled times. The ministry's focus was pretty apolitical in those early years. I mean, Dobson positioned himself as a mentor to parents, not a preacher, and honestly, listeners loved him. By 1993, Focus on the Family was receiving a staggering 10,000 letters and 3,000 phone calls per day from individuals seeking personal counseling or resources. Dobson would assemble a team of staff counselors to try to respond to all the inquiries, often referring families to local therapists who were probably affiliated with the church or other support groups. Focus on the Family had tapped into this deep well of need among evangelical households for guidance on living out their faith in day-to-day family life. Yet, even in those early stages, Dobson's ambitions for Focus on the Family went beyond private household matters. He was alarmed by what he saw as the moral decline of America, rising divorce rates, the normalization of premarital sex, and, oh no, women's liberation. And he increasingly spoke about a culture war against the traditional family. So Dobson would begin to openly blend Christian counseling with conservative social commentary. So in practice, this meant that Focus on the Family radio episodes might toggle from tips on toddler discipline to hearing Dobson lament that liberal court rulings on school prayer or abortion were eroding the nation's Christian foundations. Sounds familiar in this day and age, don't it? So this fusion of family advice with culture warrior rhetoric made Dobson something of a pioneer of the modern Christian rights messaging. By the early 80s, he was not just a counselor, but a crusader in the eyes of his followers. He was basically the anti-woke leader of the 80s. Focus on the Family's growth during the 80s was also explosive. To accommodate its expanding staff and operations, the ministry relocated from California to Colorado Springs in 1991. They were lured there by lower costs, a central U.S. location, and also a community that was known for being a burgeoning hub of evangelical organizations. And as someone who grew up in Colorado, I can tell you Colorado Springs is a mecca of megachurches and evangelical preaching, and it at the time was developing a reputation as being the Jerusalem of modern-day America due to the concentration of conservative Christian groups there. So Focus on the Family decided to open a sprawling campus on a 47-acre site in northern Colorado Springs, featuring multiple brick office buildings and even its own visitor welcome center, complete with a bookstore and children's play areas. At the time of the move, Focus had around 1,200 employees, a number that would grow to 1,400 by 2002. So everything about Focus on the Family was becoming bigger and more professional. Its radio show was heard on hundreds of stations nationwide, its publishing arm was producing books and magazines, and its donor rolls numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Yet, as Focus on the Family's profile grew, so did concerns, even among some evangelicals, that Dobson's ministry was drifting from its stated mission of helping families and into the murky waters of partisan politics. In the 90s, one early member of the organization publicly criticized Focus for becoming too political, arguing it had strayed from simply strengthening families to engaging in power-driven activism. And the charge was not without merit. Focus on the Family had indeed begun to wield significant political influence, especially among Christian conservative voters and housemakers. Dobson did not shy away from this role. He used his daily radio platform that was now reaching millions of people to share his opinions on legislations and elections, but this would often be in some thinly veiled terms. Because, remember, Focus on the Family is a nonprofit. It's tax exempt. It can't legally endorse candidates. But Dobson found ways to make his preferences known. For example, in 96, he pointedly refused to support Republican nominee Bob Doyle, who he found to be too moderate. And in 98, he warned the GOP that they must not abandon pro-life and anti-gay principles, or they would pay a price. So by 2004, Dobson went so far as to endorse President George W. Bush from the stage of a rally in Washington, D.C. at a May Day for Marriage event that was an entire event that was crusading against same-sex unions. I mean, imagine hating a single group of people so much who literally do not affect you in any way. You hate them so much that you literally make an event to celebrate that hatred. Like, disgusting. Put your time into something better. And behind the scenes, Focus on the Family also constructed a political machinery to try to amplify its agenda. Dobson helped found the Family Research Council, or FRC, in 1981 as a Washington, D.C.-based lobbying arm to influence federal policy. In 1988, FRC was formally merged under Focus on the Family's umbrella, with evangelical strategist Gary Bauer installed as its president. Separation of church and state? I guess Focus on the Family don't know her. Now, at the state level, Focus on the Family quietly built an alliance of family policy councils, state-level affiliates that could push the Focus agenda in local legislatures. Dobson began this state alliance in the 80s and initially operated behind closed doors. Members were even urged to keep the network a secret to appear like it's a grassroots array of independent groups rather than a coordinated campaign led by Focus on the Family. By the 90s, the network's existence became known, and it would later be formally organized as Focus's lobbying arm called Focus on the Family Action, now known as Family Policy Alliance. It would be through these channels that Focus on the Family could influence laws and elections at every level, all while the main organization maintained its charitable veneer of simply being a ministry. And I just want to take a moment to point out the ridiculousness of these titles of these groups. Focus on the Family, Family Political Alliance. They're all trying to sound like, oh, we're just here for family values. We're here for the betterment of the community. But what it's really doing is diminishing the fact that family looks different for everyone. My family is literally my husband and my cat. Some families have same-sex parents. Some families have been blended. So this blatant attack on anyone who doesn't subscribe to the Christian nuclear family idea is going against the grain and deserves all this hate. It's absolutely disgusting. You're not trying to save families. You just hate people who are different than you. And obviously, Dobson's strident positions earned him many enemies. The Human Rights Campaign, or HRC, which was a leading LGBTQ+ rights organization, consistently blasted Dobson and Focus on the Family as malicious and extreme. In 2017, when Vice President Mike Pence, who was a longtime Dobson ally, spoke at Focus on the Family's 40th anniversary, HRC denounced Focus on the Family as an anti-gay group that promotes dangerous and abusive practices like conversion therapy and fights against even basic protections for LGBTQ youth. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which monitors extremist groups, tracked Focus on the Family's anti-gay rhetoric for years and noted that while Dobson couched his opposition in religious terms, the real-world effect was a sustained anti-gay crusade. And that's a quote. In fact, SPLC long hesitated to label Focus on the Family a hate group because Dobson's rhetoric, though hostile, was still framed in this religious doctrine. However, by this year, May 2025, SPLC formally listed Focus on the Family as an anti-LGBTQ hate group, concluding that its continual demonization of LGBTQ people, such as labeling gay parenting as a perverse social experiment, crossed the line. Dobson, who had retired from Focus by then, surely would have dismissed the designation as spite from radical liberals. And his successor, Jim Daly, indeed did dismiss it, calling SPLC scandal-ridden and accusing them of using careless and potentially violent rhetoric for tagging Focus a hate group. By the time James Dobson resigned from Focus on the Family in 2010, he was 73 and had led the ministry for over 30 years. The transition was not entirely smooth. Focus on the Family had installed a new president, Jim Daly, in 2005 to handle day-to-day operations, while Dobson would remain chairman of the board and voice of the radio show. But Dobson's uncompromising style sometimes clashed with a younger generation of leaders who were concerned that Focus needed to tone down its partisan image. In early 2010, Dobson was let go from the radio program, and the board effectively pushed him into retirement, though the organization phrased it as being amicable. And almost immediately, Dobson launched a new radio ministry called Family Talk, ensuring he could continue broadcasting his views to loyal fans. But it's like at some point, let it go, dude. Let it go. You've aged out. However, his departure from Focus marked the end of an era. In August 2025, Dobson passed away at age 89, and many evangelical admirers mourned the loss of a Christian patriarch. But many others, including those raised in homes influenced by Dobson, reacted with blunt relief. Quote, "He committed his entire life to violence and cruelty, and now he's gone. I've been waiting to write this epitaph since I was a child," unquote. This is what one columnist and ex-evangelical, referring to the trauma caused by Dobson's teachings, would write. A pastor from Texas reflected, quote, "It's genuinely hard to quantify the pain he and his organization are responsible for," unquote. But love him or hate him, James Dobson's shadow looms large over Focus on the Family and the American families it touched. When Jim Daly took over as the president and CEO of Focus on the Family in 2005, he obviously had big shoes to fill. Daly, a former salesman who had risen through the ranks of Focus's international division, brought a very different personal story than Dobson. He was orphaned and raised in foster care, and often shares how he found Christ as a teen and eventually thrived, crediting mentors, perseverance. He had this classic overcoming hardship tale that really played well with the Focus constituency. Now at the helm of Focus, Daly initially signaled a desire to dial back the political intensity and refocus on the core family counseling mission. In interviews, he acknowledged that younger generations of Christians were weary of the harsh tone of the culture wars. And around 2007, Focus on the Family's executive leadership made a strategic shift. They invested more heavily in youth-oriented family programs and slightly de-emphasized the overt political battles that were favored by Dobson. Daly himself cultivated a friendlier image. He was less likely to appear on stage denouncing politicians and more likely to speak about the need for civil dialogue. For instance, in one often cited 2011 interview, Daly conceded that Christian conservatives had lost the battle against same-sex marriage after a string of legalizations and suggested that it was time to find areas of compassion even while holding to biblical beliefs. Such comments, however mild, would surprise observers who were used to Dobson's fire and brimstone approach. Now, in practice, under Jim Daly's ongoing leadership, Focus on the Family's ideology and positions, they haven't substantially changed. The organization remains firmly opposed to abortion, LGBTQ rights, sex outside heterosexual marriage, and so on. But the rhetoric has softened slightly in tone. These days, you might hear them emphasize loving the sinner, not the sin, and offering support for those struggling with same-sex attraction, rather than just bluntly calling homosexuality an evil perversion. but I don't think one is better than the other at this point. In 2025, Daly responded to the focus on the family being called a hate group, claiming they weren't anti-gay, they were just anti-sin, expressing that they were being labeled a hate group for simply upholding family values. Okay, give me a break, dude. Another controversial decision Daly made was Focus on the Family's move in 2017 to declare itself a church for IRS purposes, even though it's not a church in the conventional sense. It doesn't have any weekly congregants or sacraments. This maneuver, though, which has been adopted by a few other large evangelical nonprofits, allowed Focus on the Family to stop disclosing its financial details and top salaries publicly, as most nonprofits must do. A Focus spokesperson candidly admitted the change was done primarily to protect the confidentiality of our donors, unquote. The lack of transparency drew criticism from watchdogs who suspected Focus was trying to hide executive pay or declining revenue. But also, if you're able to hide who your donors are, they won't be outed as supporting a hate group. So maybe that was part of it. Just be transparent. If you really think this way, say it with your chest. Come on now. What are you afraid of? If you believe it, if you hate the sin, not the sinner. The fact that you want to hide it only exposes you for knowing that what you're doing is wrong. But Daly insisted everything was above board and that the donor base simply valued anonymity. Okay. Focus on the Family is not just a passive ministry offering advice. It's an activist organization, unabashedly lobbying and campaigning on a host of public policy issues. From LGBTQ+ rights to abortion to education, Focus has left its fingerprints on nearly every major social battle of the past 40 years. No issue has defined Focus on the Family's public reputation more than its unyielding opposition to LGBTQ+ rights. For decades, Focus has fought against gay right measures, same-sex marriage, and the acceptance of homosexuality in society, viewing it as the homosexual agenda, as nothing less than a satanic assault on the family. Why do you care? Is my question. Why do you care? If you really think gay people are going to hell, and you're not, and you're going to heaven, then why do you care? As early as 1980s, Dobson used Focus's platform to decree homosexuality as immoral and harmful. In the 90s, Focus on the Family eagerly joined political fights to curb gay rights, with Dobson personally leading rallies and initiatives. We've mentioned how Focus had even helped pass Colorado's Anti-Gay Amendment 2 in 1992. Another major moment was Don't Ask, Don't Tell. When President Clinton sought to allow gay people to serve in the military, Dobson and Focus on the Family ferociously opposed it. A Focus newsletter at the time warned that having homosexuals in the ranks would destroy military morale and put the nation at risk. And this stance would later earn Dobson criticism from more moderate evangelicals who noted a lack of compassion for those who are willing to serve our country. In the 2000s, as the push for same-sex marriage gained steam, Focus on the Family became one of the leading national voices mobilizing opposition to marriage equality. Dobson compared the fight against gay marriage to the battle against Nazi Germany, and obviously, Jewish groups chastised him. Because what the fuck? Did he forget that Nazis also targeted the gay community? So, I guess it takes one to know one. One of Focus on the Family's most consequential and well-documented campaigns was California's Proposition 8 in 2008. Prop 8 was a ballot initiative to amend the California Constitution to outlaw same-sex marriage after the state's courts briefly legalized it. Focus on the Family poured significant resources into passing Prop 8. Financial records show Focus contributed at least $727,000 in cash and services to the Yes on 8 campaign. The group's strategist, Tom Minery, later bragged in an email that from the earliest strategic discussions to the massive signature drive to get Prop 8 on the ballot, Focus on the Family has been integrally involved. In short, Focus on the Family proudly declared itself a key architect of Prop 8's passage, framing it as a victory that could shape millions of lives for generations. Of course, Prop 8 was ultimately short-lived, and it was struck down as unconstitutional in 2010 and was totally invalidated by the Supreme Court's Obergefell decision legalizing gay marriage nationwide in 2015. But for that moment in 2008, Focus on the Family stood at the pinnacle of anti-gay political action, proving it could sway policy in the nation's largest state. And as many people know, Focus on the Family has been entrenched in controversy. Perhaps nothing illustrates the public backlash against Focus on the Family's anti-LGBTQ stance better than the incident in Colorado Springs after the 2022 Club Q shooting. The spray-painted accusation, "Blood is on your hands," on Focus's sign captured a sentiment long voiced by LGBTQ advocates. That Focus on the Family's constant vilification of queer people contributes to a climate of hate and violence. Focus's leadership, of course, condemned the vandalism and the shooting. Jim Daly insisted we stand against hate and that the shooter was a very disturbed individual acting alone. But local activists pointed out that Focus had spent years lobbying against LGBTQ protections, including as recently as 2014, when it publicly fought to stop Colorado from adding sexual orientation and gender identity to anti-discrimination law. To them, Focus's expression of sympathy rang hollow against its record of marginalizing the LGBTQ community. And I really need anyone with a platform or a following to start recognizing that what they say matters. You can't lobby against gay rights and then act shocked when people do a hate crime. You are indirectly responsible for the shooting. Now, alongside sexuality, abortion is the other pillar of Focus on the Family's activism. If there's any issue where Focus enjoys a relatively broad base of support among American evangelicals and Catholics, it's opposing abortion and promoting what they call a culture of life. From early on, James Dobson took a hardline pro-life position, no exceptions for R-word or incest, viewing abortion as the taking of innocent human life. Focus on the Family has approached this battle on multiple fronts, counseling women to choose alternatives, lobbying for restrictive laws, and engaging in high-profile media campaigns to sway public opinion. On the political side, Focus on the Family and its allies were key players in supporting laws to limit abortion. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Focus's magazine, Citizen, kept readers informed of every incremental restriction: parental consent laws, waiting periods, bans on late-term abortion, which Dobson graphically condemned. They encouraged constituents to lobby for all of these measures. And Jim Daly often points out that Focus on the Family is famously known as one of the country's most prominent anti-abortion organizations. And indeed, in Colorado Springs, the group's headquarters became a gathering point for pro-life rallies. Focus lent its support to the Federal Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act in 2003, celebrating its passage. It also rallied behind state-level heartbeat bills and, more recently, state abortion bans triggered by the overturning of Roe v. Wade. A cultural milestone for Focus's pro-life cause came during the Super Bowl in February 2010. Focus on the Family paid for a 30-second commercial during the Super Bowl, which is obviously a hugely expensive and high-profile slot, to air a pro-life message featuring college football star Tim Tebow and his mother, Pam. In the ad, Pam Tebow tells a lighthearted version of her story. She had contracted a dangerous infection while pregnant with Tim in 1987 and ignored doctors' alleged advice to consider abortion, ultimately giving birth to her miracle baby, who became a Heisman-winning quarterback. The ad was subtle. It never even uttered the word abortion, ending simply with the tagline, "Celebrate family, celebrate life," and pointing viewers to Focus on the Family's website. But news of the planned ad leaked weeks in advance and ignited intense controversy. Women's groups like Planned Parenthood and the National Organization for Women protested CBS's decision to run an advocacy ad on such a prominent broadcast, noting that CBS had previously rejected ads by progressive groups on the grounds that they were too political. In this case, CBS bent its rules, possibly for the big ad dollars and being under pressure from conservative fans, a move that critics called out as a double standard, since CBS had turned away ads from a gay dating site and a liberal church in prior years. Focus on the Family followed up with another ad in 2012, this time during NFL playoffs, featuring adorable kids reciting John 3:16, a Bible verse about God's love, which also drew positive media attention and much less controversy than the Tebow ad. Jim Daly claimed these campaigns as evidence that Focus could engage in the broader culture winsomely on its values. Detractors, however, saw it as a calculated strategy to mainstream the organization's hardline agenda using wholesome imagery. The culmination of Focus on the Family's pro-life efforts came with the Supreme Court's 2022 Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade. For Focus and its allies, this was the long-prayed-for triumph of a generation. James Dobson, still active on his personal ministry broadcasts, exulted in the Dobbs ruling, directly crediting Donald Trump's judicial appointments for making it possible. On its website, Focus posted articles like, "Roe v. Wade overturned, now what?" rallying supporters to push for abortion bans state by state and to stand for life when it matters most. They warned pro-lifers not to become complacent and to continue supporting crisis pregnancy centers and legal efforts, pointing out that in blue states, abortions would continue. In short, Focus on the Family's pro-life activism is far from over. It has merely entered a new phase. They just want to strip rights from women left and right. Awesome. Now, Focus on the Family's vision of a godly society extends deeply into the realm of education and family policy. Believing that public schools and popular culture are battlegrounds for children's hearts and minds, Focus has long sought to inject its values into curricula and media, while opposing trends it sees as harmful to children. A key priority has been promoting religious expression in public schools. Focus on the Family routinely reminds Christian students and parents that they have a right to bring their faith to school. The organization's legal guides inform students that they can pray at lunchtime, form Bible clubs, and so on. The annual Bring Your Bible to School Day, launched by Focus in 2014, is a flagship effort in this vein. Each first Thursday of October, Focus encourages students nationwide to carry their Bibles and even share their favorite verses with classmates. I wonder how they feel about children having to wear bulletproof backpacks to school. Do they care about that? Now, civil liberty groups like the ACLU keep a close watch to ensure that participation in this event is voluntary and student-led, not coerced or organized by school officials, which would violate the Establishment Clause. So far, Bring Your Bible Day has gone relatively smoothly, aside from occasional complaints. It's an example of Focus on the Family's proactive strategy to keep Christianity visible in the public square, wrapped in the rhetoric of rights and freedoms. Conversely, Focus on the Family vigorously fights the inclusion of comprehensive sex education and LGBTQ inclusive curricula in schools. They argue that teaching kids about contraception, diverse sexual orientations, or gender identities is tantamount to radical indoctrination. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, Focus was aligned with other conservative groups in pushing abstinence-only sex ed. In 2010, when the Obama administration shifted federal funding away from abstinence-only programs to more comprehensive approaches, Focus on the Family was sharply critical, accusing the government of encouraging teen sexual activity. Well, that's a reach, ain't it? In some states, Focus's family policy allies have backed laws requiring parental opt-in for any sex ed beyond abstinence, often citing parental rights. This connects to a broader parental rights movement that Focus supports, which includes opposition to things like mandatory HPV vaccines. They argued it might promote promiscuity, and opposition to school counseling that affirms transgender youth without parental consent. Another education fight has been over anti-bullying initiatives that include LGBTQ students. Focus on the Family paradoxically argues it's against bullying, but also against certain anti-bullying programs. The nuance being that they oppose programs that specifically address bullying of gay or trans students, claiming that these are veiled gay advocacy efforts. And you want to argue and say you're not a hate group, but you're like totally cool with teenage people who are gay being bullied. Awesome. In 2012, Focus's Citizen Link outlet praised a school district for dropping an anti-bullying policy that mentioned sexual orientation, celebrating it as a win against pro-gay curriculum. Instead, Focus launched its own project called True Tolerance, which offers schools a template anti-bullying policy that doesn't single out any particular group or protection. Now, critics say that this erases the fact that LGBTQ kids are disproportionately bullied, and I would agree. The Human Rights Campaign has lambasted Focus for this stance, noting that Focus on the Family even opposed anti-bullying efforts in schools if they involved protecting LGBTQ youth. Focus on the Family has also weighed in on academic content like evolution versus creation, because of course they did. As a staunchly biblical ministry, Focus promotes creationist or intelligent design perspectives. In the 90s and 2000s, Focus published and distributed materials against evolution. They weren't on the front lines of the courtroom battles like some groups, like they didn't spearhead the Dover trial or Kansas board fights, but they have certainly encouraged parents to demand that schools teach both sides of evolution. The Focus radio show often hosted creationist authors who dispute mainstream science. In 2006, after a major intelligent design court defeat in Dover, Focus's magazine still framed it as a rallying point for Christians to challenge Darwinian orthodoxy. They've recommended resources from the Discovery Institute, the leading intelligent design think tank. And the theme is consistent. Focus sees secular scientific teachings that exclude God as part of the moral decay, and thus they support efforts to introduce creationist ideas as truth in education. Just because you believe it doesn't mean it's true. Now, Focus on the Family's stance on gender roles also filters into how they view education and society. The organization has traditionally championed a complementarian view. Men and women have distinct, God-given roles in family and church. While Focus doesn't explicitly campaign to keep women out of the workplace, indeed there are many women who work at Focus itself, its literature, however, often extols the role of mothers as homemakers and warns against feminist ideas that blur gender differences. And this sometimes seeps into public controversies. For example, Focus on the Family Singapore, which is an affiliate, was embroiled in a 2014 controversy when it ran workshops for junior college students that were criticized as sexist, teaching, for instance, that girls should not be too aggressive if they want to attract husbands, and that boys prefer submissive feminine girls. Ew. After complaints from a student and media exposure, the Singapore Ministry of Education had to review and suspend those workshops. The incident showed how Focus's ideology of traditional gender norms can clash with modern expectations, even in international settings. Additionally, Dobson and Focus have long campaigned against pornography and overly sexual or violent media. In the 80s, Focus was part of efforts to pressure 7-Eleven to stop selling Playboy. In the 2000s, Focus supported the Parents Television Council's crusades for cleaner TV content. They often publish guidance to parents on filtering internet content. Now, these are less controversial aims in general. Few people advocate for pornography to children, but Focus tends to extend this to opposing any media that offends its sensibilities. So, for example, Focus decreed the Harry Potter books and movies for promoting witchcraft, which drew a lot of eye rolls as an overreaction. They created Plugged In Online, a review site that rates movies, music, and games from a Christian morality perspective, flagging things like profanity, sexual content, occult references, etc. Plugged In has a following among Christian parents, though outsiders sometimes mock its ultra-detailed tallying of swear words in films. This media monitoring reflects Focus's intention to be the gatekeeper of family-friendly culture. And true to their roots in conservative Christianity, Focus on the Family opposes the legalization of recreational drugs like marijuana and the expansion of gambling. They argue that both lead to addiction and family breakdown. LOL, and their headquarters is in Colorado, which was the first state in the U.S. to legalize marijuana. Hilarious. The Family Policy Alliance today lobbies against marijuana decriminalization, calling it a part of a demonic attack on society's well-being. Calm down, please. On gambling, Focus was involved in coalitions that fought the spread of casinos and state lotteries in the 90s and 2000s, citing how gambling addictions ruined families financially. These stances are somewhat less front and center than the sex and gender issues, but they remain part of Focus's philosophy of promoting a virtuous and disciplined family. And now on to the controversies and criticisms, which I'm sure is what we've all been waiting for. Now, we've obviously touched on some of them, but one broad criticism is that Focus on the Family, despite being a religious nonprofit, operates as a de facto arm of the Republican Party's religious right wing. Critics point out that Dobson and Focus routinely intervened in elections and legislation, blurring church-state separation. For example, in 2008, Focus on the Family Action, the political wing of Focus on the Family, published a notorious 16-page letter from 2012 in Obama's America. A bizarre, fictionalized letter that imagined the U.S. after 4 years of an Obama presidency. It predicted things like abortion on demand, gay marriage nationwide, terrorist attacks on U.S. citizens, Christian radio off the air, homeschool effectively banned, and even the Boy Scouts disbanded because of Obama's liberal policies. The letter was a scaremongering catalog of right-wing nightmares intended clearly to dissuade Christians from voting for Obama. And it backfired spectacularly, drawing a ton of criticism and ridicule. But it does demonstrate how overtly partisan Focus's political arm was willing to be. The group has since produced voter guides and prayer initiatives that effectively support Republican candidates without explicitly saying so. Critics like Americans United for Separation of Church and State have questioned whether Focus violated its tax-exempt status over the years by crossing into electioneering. Focus's defense is usually that they're simply advocating on moral issues and that any candidate alignment is incidental. But still, the alignment is so strong that Tony Perkins of FRC openly said that Dobson is on the Mount Rushmore of conservative politics, and Ralph Reed noted that Dobson could have been a formidable presidential candidate. For those who believe religious ministries should stick to charity and not politics, Focus on the Family represents an inappropriate politicization of faith. Even some evangelicals feel that Focus sold out the gospel for a political agenda, making enemies of those they should be loving. Dobson's retort was that moral issues are biblical issues, not political, so he saw no distinction. This debate over Focus's political role continues, especially as it remains a key player in culture war lobbying through the Family Policy Alliance. Focus on the Family's credibility has been questioned due to its pattern of using dubious or cherry-picked evidence. Focus's publications have sometimes propagated falsehoods common in far-right circles. For example, Focus used to claim that there is a link between abortion and breast cancer, a theory debunked by major health organizations. They also gave platforms to climate change skeptics in the 2000s, aligning with the political right's denialism despite broad evangelical calls to care for creation. These instances led critics to say Focus cares more about ideology than truth or science. Even on theological grounds, some pastors argue Focus elevates 1950s suburban American family norms to divine status, essentially cultural idolatry. The term focus on the family itself, they joke, could be focus on a fantasy, meaning the idealized nuclear family that many real families can't live up to. The focus on discipline in Dobson's teaching has also been criticized for encouraging a controlling parenting style that can cross into abuse if taken too far. For over nearly 50 years, Focus on the Family has transformed from a small counseling ministry into a household name and cultural lightning rod. It's woven itself into the fabric of American life, in church pulpits and political halls, in family living rooms and courtrooms. Its very name evokes a certain vision of America, church-going, patriarchal families living by Judeo-Christian values. There are indeed families who will attest that Focus broadcast about forgiveness prevented their divorce, or that a Focus referred counselor helped them overcome addiction. And there are also individuals who testify with equal fervor that focus on the family's rhetoric made them feel worthless or that its political influence deprived them of rights or dignity. And in a sense, focus on the family's story is the story of America's culture wars. Deeply held values colliding, each side believing they fight for righteousness and the soul of the nation. In a sense, focus on the family's story is the story of America's culture wars, where one side holds values based off of their religion, and the other side is fighting for the very human rights that seem to be dissipating right before our eyes. As of 2025, Focus on the Family remains headquartered in Colorado Springs, still helmed by Jim Daly, still pressing on with its mission. It has weathered the transitions that felled many 80s-era evangelical ministries. It's proven adaptable, using new media, finding new allies, and reframing its message when needed. But luckily, American society has changed around it. Same-sex marriage is legal and widely accepted by younger generations. Abortion access, while curtailed in some states, is supported by a majority of Americans in many scenarios. Secularization has grown, and Christianity's influence in the public sphere is perceived to be waning. In response, Focus has shown no signs of moderating its positions. If anything, it's grown more vocally alarmed about trends like transgender rights and more committed to rallying a faithful remnant to hold the line. So all we can do is continue to expose them for their hateful beliefs and understand what organizations and politicians they support and do our best to avoid those. So let me know what you think about this video and Focus on the Family. I have just an anecdotal story to share, which is why obviously I'm biased when it comes to this group. I do not like them, and I'm going to be critical of them. There were several instances growing up in Colorado where a gay boy would be grotesquely bullied or even murdered, and this group would celebrate that or say it was God's will. And it's disgusting to celebrate a hate act in that way. And I know that the first retort is going to be, well, liberals celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk. I don't know any of them who did. We can't continue to generalize groups of people. We're all human, and no one deserves to be murdered at all, but specifically because of how they identify and just want to live their life. They're not hurting anybody. This group has actively made it more difficult for the LGBTQIA+ community to not just thrive, but survive. This is a little bit heavy, so if you need to check off, we're going to talk about unaliving for a second. A really, really close friend of mine who was gay in college unalived himself, and it was heartbreaking. He was the light of our group. None of us thought anything was wrong, and I can't help but wonder if it was this, shame of who you are or hate speech that drove him to do what he did. He was an incredible person, and, growing up in a community where hate speech is not just kind of tolerated, but celebrated and normalized in certain areas, not all of Colorado, but definitely more conservative areas, it does cause people to lose their life or be killed, and we need to be aware of that. And people need to be careful about what they say, because words do have an impact, especially if your words are reaching millions of people. They're going to be interpreted in a million different ways, and people base their actions around their beliefs. So if you're promoting a hateful belief, you are responsible for how those beliefs spread and the action that other people take because of those beliefs and that rhetoric that was spread by you. Anyways, I know that got dark for a second, but I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention, and thank you guys all so much. Thanks for letting me share my story or my friend's story with you. And I hope you all are just staying safe out there, having a nice Thanksgiving weekend, I hope. So just stay safe out there, ask questions, always stay skeptical, and please check out the pinned comment below for the Amazon wish list for today's parent. Thank you all so much again, and I'll see you soon. Bye.